Welcome to the Williamsville Public Library and Museum. Today is Wednesday, October 8th, 2023, and we're here talking today to Mr. Curry, and got a few friends with us here, just talking about your life here in Williamsville. Let's just start at the beginning, Charlie. What can you tell us about your family growing up here in Williamsville?
My growing up here in Williamsville, the best I can remember is I was born out here at what's called Selbytown, just west of Donnelly's out there. And we lived out there in a house. In fact, that's where I was born. That house in the past had burnt down and everything. But anyway, it was during the Depression, 1934. And life was not very good then. You lived on what you could, and there was times when you didn't have anything to live on. But anyway, grew up out there and went to school. I didn't go to school out there. I didn't go to school until my dad was able to get a part-time farm job in Lincoln, and that's where I started my first grade up there. Then we was there about a year, and then we moved to Williamsville. When we moved to Williamsville, we lived in a shack. I mean a shack. Right across from the barber shop, which was born by a guy named Bourne. And we had no running water, just a place to live. There was an outhouse there, and you threw your garbage out on the railroad tracks. That's how close it was.
Okay.
I mean, if you stepped out the back door, you was on the railroad tracks. And that's where I finished about the second or third grade of school. I spent all my time in the Williamsville School District.
Okay.
And graduated in 1954. In the meantime, after we moved out of that shack, we moved to the south end of town on Jones Street and lived in a three-room house. There was 6 of us kids, and from there, it was during the war, and there was a family lived 2 doors down, and her husband got inducted into the service, and he got killed.
Oh.
So she moved back up to McLean, Illinois, and we ended up somehow buying the house because my father had got a job at Alice Chalmers at the time.
Okay, so the tractor company?
Yeah, but they were building military stuff at the time. And we lived there until I graduated out of high school. In the meantime, us kids, it was called survival around this town. You didn't have to worry about anything if you didn't get in till midnight and you'd been sitting up on the bank corner all that time. It still didn't make any difference. Nobody was going to bother you. In the summertime, we spent most of our time out at the creek in the daytime. Even when they had the polio epidemic, we weren't allowed out of our yard. So us kids would all leave early in the morning and go out that creek and stay out there all day. And sometimes we might stay 2 or 3 days. But that was enjoyable. That's what we done in the summertime. And at the age of 13, right about 13, I got a job working for a guy named Patrick Laffey. He had a little market there on the corner next to the old bank, and I worked there. I dusted shelves. Back then, you had to sack the potatoes that come in. You had to sack the
You like the flour and the sugar and all of that
all
too?
that sugar and everything.
Okay.
And if somebody come in and got extra groceries and couldn't carry them home, they had a wagon there. I would pull that wagon to their house.
Okay. Did you get a little extra money for delivering the groceries, or was that just
they
expected?
might tip you and they might not.
Okay.
But anyway, I made approximately $1 to $1.50 on the day that I worked.
Okay.
But then after the war, the Laffeys decided they wanted to get out of it. That was in 1946 or 45 when the war was over, and I no longer had a job. So I fiddled around different places, cut corn out of beans for the farmers in the summertime, helped out in the old drugstore. We had a blind man that ran a drugstore.
Okay.
And we'd go in and help him out and everything.
Sure. And how old were you about that time?
Not much more than 14.
Okay.
Then from there, I succeeded in getting a job working for a guy named Ellis Hale. Right after the Second World War, he opened that building store up because he had worked in it when he was a kid. He opened it up, and I went to work for him, and I worked for him 6 years. And done that while I was going to school.
Okay.
And the old superintendent, which was Ray Page at the time, he would allow me to take off in the afternoon and go up, as long as he knew I was at that store working. I would end up making about $12, $13 a week.
Pretty good money at that time.
That was good money. I stayed with him for the 6 years, and then he decided he wanted to move out to Colorado to be with his in-laws, and he bought stores out there. But I refused to go with him.
Okay.
But I did learn a lot while I was in that store. When I seen something missing off that shelf, and if we had it someplace else, I stocked it. I kept them dusted, done about everything. I would get up there early in the morning, about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and the bread boxes were outside. The bread men would leave the bread there. I'd put the bread in. Then after I put the bread in on the shelf and everything, I'd go down and build a fire in the furnace.
Okay.
So we'd have heat. And that was lasted, like I said, 6 years. Then he sold the store to a guy named Dick Wagner.
Okay.
And Dick Wagner, I didn't go there at first. I decided to run the restaurant next door, which belonged to Stanley Doty, or his widow, Mabel Doty.
Okay.
I wasn't very successful in running a restaurant. So in the meantime, Dick Wagner hired me, and I worked for Dick for 6 years.
Okay.
And in that time of the 6 years, I was able to accumulate a little money. I bought an old car that I still went to school, drove, but didn't take it very far because I didn't have insurance or anything.
Sure, sure. It sounds like you learned a lot from all that time that you spent working those jobs.
Oh, yes.
Which,
yes.
you know, we're going to talk about later in terms of how that ended up being part of you starting your own business.
Okay.
But jumping back for just a minute, I'm assuming this strong work ethic that you had something to do with your parents. So can we take a step back and just tell us your parents' names and a little bit more about them?
Well, my dad, after the war too, he quit AC for Alice Chalmers. They were laying off at the time too, and he went to work in the coal mines. But the coal mines only worked in the winter, and he worked there for quite a few years, and then the mines closed. And then from there, he just odd jobs until he got a job working for the maintenance man for the village of Williamsville.
Okay, so he was the maintenance guy for the whole village?
The whole village. He
Okay.
took care of the water, the sewer. We was one of the fortunate towns. We had water and sewer.
Okay.
And he had to do that out of his automobile. He had an old car. They didn't have a vehicle for him to use, and he fixed the streets, stuff like that. I want to
Okay.
tell you, he done a better job back then. They would take and put this coal patch in these holes and stuff,
Yeah.
and we'd rake it and smooth it down.
Right.
Of course, they've got a nice street now. For years after that, when he retired, well, the guys and they also hired extra guys in.
So they needed some extra help to
So we always
replace him.
helped our father.
Nice.
And they had free shows uptown here
Mhm.
every Wednesday night. And
What other things, aside from this strong work ethic that your parents gave you, what other lessons do you think they taught you, or what values do you think they passed on to you?
I was going to say, they taught us to try to be honest. We didn't go out of town and tear up anything or anything like that. Like I said, we spent our summers out doing whatever we could.
Sure.
Then after I graduated out of high school, I went to work in the store there.
Mhm.
And for some reason or other, I don't remember what happened, but I joined the service.
Okay.
And I didn't pass the physical. So when I came back, I was only gone down there 3 days taking the physical. He had hired somebody else.
Okay.
So I was out of a job.
Okay.
Well, I accepted it, and I worked at the International Shoe Factory for about 6 months or something like that
Was that in Springfield?
in Springfield. And then this guy got a hold of me and he said, Charlie, he said, I'd like for you to come back and go to work for us. And I said, well, how much? Well, I'll give your same old wage, 50 cents an hour. And I thought, well, people are making more money than that. So I said, no, I'm not interested. I said, if you want to pay me 75 cents an hour, I will. 2 or 3 days later, he called me and he said, you got a job.
Okay.
So I worked there.
Which grocery store was that?
Well, the one it was on the corner up here.
Okay.
It was with Dick Wagner.
Okay, so that was with Dick
And,
Wagner. Okay.
I worked for Dick Wagner actually spent 6 years with him, but he wanted he wanted to go into the used car business, so he let me run the store, and I ran it for a year. And I thought, well, I'm not making any headway here. And there was a guy from up around Clinton came down, and he wanted me to come up and operate a store up there.
Mhm.
Actually, it would be my store, and he would finance. And so I went and told Dick what I was going to do, and he said, well, let me just sell you this store.
Okay.
I said, I haven't got any money for it. The guy up there is going to finance the whole thing. And he said,
Right.
all you got to do is pay me so much every week, and that'll pay for it. And that's how I bought that store. And I ran it for 19 years.
So now we want to talk more about the grocery store part, but somewhere along there, as you were working all these jobs and getting this experience and so forth, I understand you managed to get married and start a family. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So how many kids did you end up having?
Ended up having 3.
Okay. And did they all go through the Williamsville schools as well?
All my kids graduated from Williamsville schools, and most of my grandkids graduated from Williamsville.
Okay. All right.
But now they're scattered around, and I've only got 2 in the school district now.
Okay. In addition to your family life and your busy jobs and such, did you have time to get involved in the community in any way?
I was on the city council.
Okay, so you were on the village board?
I think I spent 14 years on that board.
Okay.
And it ended up, they couldn't find anybody to run for mayor.
Okay.
And I said, I'll get you somebody to run for mayor.
And who did you tap on the shoulder for
what
that?
I done was I got me a petition that I was going to run for mayor.
Okay.
Well, the gang in there, I won't say who they were. But anyway, they took this poor old guy that was on the board, took him out, had a few drinks, and the next day they was running him for mayor.
Okay.
Then they said, Charlie, where's your petition? I said, I didn't say I was going to run for mayor. I said, I'd get you somebody to run for mayor.
Nice.
Well, poor old Henry Carter ended up with that job. Now, he done a good job, don't get me wrong. He really did a good job.
Okay.
But it's the guys that were all sitting in there, you know, they didn't want me for mayor.
But I'm sure they appreciated your time and dedication on the village board.
And then I spent all my time there. Then I ended up, after 20 years, closing my business and going to work for somebody else, which was Kent's.
Okay.
And I worked for Kent's for 6 years. Then they sold to a guy named Mike Smith, which I worked for him for 6 years.
Now, as you were going through all this, I mean, it's kind of these snapshots in Williamsville history, you know, when we're thinking back to the small stores all the way to the IGA that used to be here and so forth. Williamsville saw a lot of changes in those times. So is there any kind of events that happened, whether it was local or international, that really stick out in your mind as something that changed life here in Williamsville?
Well,
or affected it?
I would say it's things that affected Williamsville. One of them was getting natural gas in Williamsville.
Okay, and why is that?
Everybody had propane tanks or whatever they wanted, and they came in, like, or gas company that did come in, but they laid out pipes all through the village, and we had natural gas.
Okay, and why was that a big deal?
That put Patterson's out of business on the natural gas business. But it was an improvement on the village. It really was. And then we, at that time too, they were getting their new sewer system, which improved the things about the village.
Sure.
They started a few things, ordinances that you had to clean things up. And that's why today, if you'll drive down through Williamsville, it's the most beautiful little town you ever drove through. Am I not right, Lee?
It's an attractive place, absolutely.
Yes.
So, and part of what makes Williamsville is that we have these great community events and organizations and such. So do you remember any in particular, like any of the Autumn on the Boulevard or bicentennials or any of those big events?
I can go back. I can remember one of the first parades they had. It was right after the Second World War. I was walking across Main Street out there, and the sirens started blowing, and I thought, what's going on? The war's over. And so that night they had a big parade all around town. People marching and had flags and stuff like that. But there was only 3 automobiles in the whole parade.
Now, did Mr. Wagner have one of them?
No, no. Harvey Black, who ran the hardware, had an old car.
Okay.
And they had them headlights on the front of it. And I can still see Bobby Black to this day sitting on that.
Sitting on the front? Okay.
There. Yeah.
Sitting at the front of the car?
On the front of the car.
All right.
And Then they started having homecomings.
Mm-hmm.
That was I think might have been sponsored by the AMVETS or something, that they got a homecoming every year where they'd have a carnival and all that kind of stuff, and that was very interesting. But one little incident happened. I was one of those that would also help 2 or 3 old widows around Williamsville, pulling the weeds out of their
Sure.
flowers and everything, you know.
Sure.
And this one particular one, she told us, I'll get him to work for a dime an hour this time.
Uh-oh.
Well, I was smart enough, you know, because I needed the money for the carnival. I didn't show up at her house till after the carnival left.
Uh-oh.
So she had to go back to that 15 cents an hour.
So you were driving a tough bargain.
Driving a tough bargain.
All right.
But then when I saved enough money working there when I was still going to school, I was able to buy an old 1939 Chevrolet.
Right.
That had just been beat all to pieces. It belonged to a guy named Earl Yoke, and it had both fenders on both sides where he had hit some ice and on the river bridge and turned him around a few times and
Sure.
bent the fenders on both back in. But I
Sure.
bought it for $55.
Now, is that the one you were driving to school and to work?
Yeah, that's
Anything else in terms of your time growing up here or events in Williamsville that you wanted to talk about before we wrap this part up?
well, in our teenage days or whatever, we had a game called Ditch 'em.
And how'd you play
There
ditch
might
'em?
be 50 kids congregate up here at night. And then we'd divide up into teams, and one team would go hide, and the other team would go try to find them. Then when you found them all, well, you came back in, and the other team went hid.
Okay.
Now, we used the town as a boundary, and no parent, I don't think, ever complained about us hiding in their backyard or in their barn or whatever it
Right.
was. We had a lot of barns in this town back
Sure.
years ago.
Sure. So every place around town was fair game.
Yes, fair game. And that was one of the games we played. But then and then we got to where we were going into old enough, we would go into Moonlight Garden, skating on certain nights of the week.
Where was Moonlight Garden?
It was on the south end of Springfield.
Oh, okay.
On Wednesday nights, you could wear blue jeans.
Okay.
And we would catch a bus and go in there, or maybe a group would haul them in there.
Okay.
And then we would come back on the bus at
Okay.
11 o'clock that night.
So some good times.
We had good times. It seemed like it was good times because we never had, if somebody got out of line, they called the law. You didn't call the law.
You took care of each other.
Took care of things ourselves.
Right.
Even when I had problems with my store, I didn't call the law. I called the parent.
Right. Right.
Nobody was ever arrested.
Right. All right. Well, sounds like you have a ton of stories, and we appreciate you sharing a few of them with us today. So thank you, Charlie Curry, for coming in and sharing some of your memories of Williamsville with us.